We all have many entities, non-physical, who are there to guide us in life and help us find our way through. And the way guides very often communicate with us is just through intuition. They give us ideas and just little nudges and little feelings that sort of like, oh, that feels good, I'll go in that direction.
So like right there's the skeptic in me goes, well, why? Why do they just give you little nudges and feelings? If they want to help so much, why don't they just come out and say it?
Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of our new podcast, Spiritually Challenged. My name is Jay Sherrick. I'm here with my writing partner,
David Ron.
And also my good friend,
Steve.
He just goes by Steve.
He doesn't want to give up his last name.
There are a few issues still working their way through the courts.
Are you allowed to reveal your identity on the podcast?
Hoping by season 4, I'll be able to give you my middle name. That's the sequence.
Wait, but let's ask, are you allowed to reveal your identity?
You know, I'm not allowed, but I would, if it's okay, I would sort of prefer to be a little anonymous.
I want to just be David then.
Is that okay? If
Can I
just
be David?
And don't say who I really am?
Not your writing partner? Your friend David.
We probably should have cleared this up. Well, the point is that Steve is the CEO of a significant technology corporation. Morgan is our producer over here. Morgan, do you think we can do a podcast where one of our hosts is anonymous? Okay. Morgan says yes, so we can continue.
And I'm somewhat anonymous in my actual life, so it's not going to seem that different to any of you.
This is sort of no.
That's right.
Okay, I think, let me just clarify for our listener, if we have one at this point, or listeners. But Steve is the CEO of...
Not a CEO.
Not a CEO. He said that.
Oh, because
this is all live, right? This is all part of the podcast.
Well, it's not live.
I think this is the subject of episode 1.
This is like episode 1.
Is why Steve has to just be Steve.
Or could I be somebody, can I just make up a totally different name?
Yeah.
What should we call you?
Oprah.
Okay.
No, Oprah's too well known.
Yeah. Let's go with Steve. I'm a little thrown, though. I think we have to stop for a second.
You know, there's no stopping.
No? You're not allowed to stop in podcasts?
Well, you can edit out the stops.
Okay. Yeah. I just didn't realize one of our main hosts wasn't going to be
I thought it would be safer.
We need to explain what the show is about and why you're here, even though you want to be incognito.
Yes. What is the explanation that you're saying you're looking for?
The idea behind the show, Spiritually Challenged, is... I am someone who has pursued spiritual life for decades, and I love to talk about it. And I think a lot of spiritual content on the internet is very serious, and I thought it'd be fun to do something a little bit lighter. And the way to maybe get at it would be to do a show where I bring to the table a topic every week for our discussion, and to have you guys accompany me with different perspectives. So I'm the guy that's got all these sort of spiritual ideas, and everyone thinks I'm a little crazy.
You got both feet in.
But I think
I'm both feet in.
But then I can say, okay, I'm David and I'm Jay's writing partner, so I've been dragged through this for 25 years, mostly unwillingly, right? Where Jay pontificates about spirituality. So he's indoctrinated me against my will somewhat. So I've got 1 foot in, one foot out.
David and I have been working together for 30 years.
Is it 30?
It's pretty close, 28 or something like
really?
That. Yeah.
I keep saying 25.
Oliver was born, and Oliver's 28 now.
Wow.
And I've sort of progressed spiritually, and basically I've dragged David along. So at first he was had no spiritual inclinations at all, and would bristle at every suggestion of anything that wasn't scientific. But now he's been beaten down pretty significantly. I think I've succeeded, right, David? And
I think 1 foot in, 1 foot out. That's probably accurate, right?
You sort of go back and forth in terms of...
I want to believe.
Okay, I think that's the way
I want to believe, David's the guy I can't always go there.
Right. David's the guy who wants to believe but doesn't, but kind of wants to but doesn't. Yeah. Okay, so there's me, then there's David, and then there's the anonymous Steve. And tell us a little bit like how you fit into this equation then, Steve.
So unlike you guys have known each other for 28 years, I could just say it would be weird to say I met you 15 minutes ago. That would be too soon, right?
Yeah, we pulled Steve off the street, actually.
Right. I thought I was here to fix the air conditioning. I'm an old friend of yours, and I'm new to a lot of this experience. You and I have talked about it over time, and I'm just glad to be part of the group and part of the discussion.
But why did we ask you to join us?
Really something I continue to ask myself. What should I say?
We asked you to join us because you are actually a very successful scientist, basically. Let's talk a little bit about your educational background. You went to Berkeley, correct? No, Yale?
Yeah.
You went to Yale, studied what as an undergrad? Computer science, and then did a master's program at MIT?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you currently, and I won't give away your identity, but you currently run or are in the top echelons of a relatively large tech company.
I'm now feeling badly about both my education and my employment.
I think this is...
Well, I wanted to stress the fact that you're a scientist.
Okay, got it. I understand.
And then the main thing I wanted to stress is you really have, I would say, tell me if this is correct, but I would say you have almost no spiritual bone in your body. Is that...
Well...
tell me, what's your spiritual life like?
How do you define my spiritual life? Like going to worship? I don't do that.
Okay, don't do that.
Don't do that.
Check. And your meditation practice is like what?
I do not meditate.
Okay.
Well, I think you can boil this down to what do you think happens when someone dies?
Oh, well, I mean, like if I'm still alive and someone else dies?
No. What will happen to you when you die?
Like you're not, like if you had plans to see them next week, they won't.
They won't be there.
Like
when you die, you won't be there for Steve to visit.
Yeah, like if you have the
do you think there's
them in your calendar, you're like, oh,
they're not there.
Because now if other people who are still alive are gonna then I think
Steve's spiritual life boils down to when someone dies, they screw up your social calendar. Yeah. It's basically
if you had plans for it.
If not, then it's not that big a deal.
Well, it's not. Yeah. You don't have to think about what am I doing
Thursday. I think, but maybe what David's getting at is like, what would you say? Like, what do you think is going to happen when you die?
I don't know. I'm much more worried about everything I need to get done before I'm dead.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Well,
and as I get older, I do sort of have awareness that there isn't that much time to get all this stuff.
Okay, so you have come to the realization that there is such a thing as death.
Absolutely.
Okay, so he's that far.
Yeah, he knows he's going to die.
To be clear, he's accepted.
So he's a human.
The potential of death.
Well, and just to be clear, like I've known about death for many
long
years
time.
now.
But now you're beginning to believe in it.
Yes. No, I've always believed in it.
Okay.
But I'm not thinking about what is going to happen afterwards. I'm thinking about everything I got to get done beforehand.
So the reason I orchestrated this podcast like this is because that's your perspective.
Yes,
it's completely different. Anything that I bring up on a spiritual level will probably be relatively new or at least unacceptable to you. And you're basically, I don't want to say cynic, but skeptic. Yeah.
Skeptic.
So you're supposed to be full skeptic. David is supposed to be half skeptic. Yeah. Sometimes I think I'm going to get him to side with me. And then I'm the, crazy guy who's got all the spiritual ideas and is all in.
Right. And I think and this is more for you, doesn't have to be about how I talk about it. I think my mindset with spirituality or almost everything else is not so much skeptic or against it. It's more trying to understand it.
Okay, good.
And
I
if
love
it's
that.
good for you, then even if it's not
No, I don't feel judged. I don't feel judged by you. I mean, I love you. I think you're a good friend of mine and we have a great time together. And so, no, I don't feel judged at all. And then Morgan is here as our producer who is incredibly shy and we will allude to her, but
we might need a mask for Morgan as well.
Do we have a camera?
We don't even have a camera on Morgan.
Oh, we don't.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so
if I'm to understand the process in this thing, you will introduce a topic.
That may eventually happen. I didn't realize we would have so much baggage to get through.
And once you introduce the topic, we will discuss said topic.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
And are we ready for a topic?
Yes.
I think we're ready for a topic.
Okay. Yeah. So the first topic that I thought we could discuss on the first episode of Spiritually Challenged. Oh, hold on. We're getting hand signals from Morgan.
Morgan is just telling me to move a little bit closer to my microphone.
Okay. You want to scoot up then? Is that?
I think I'm going to lean.
You're going to lean? Okay.
I thought I thought Morgan said it would be better if I left.
That was not the hand signal.
Yeah, I'm super confused. Sorry.
No, okay.
I misread it totally.
No. We're very happy to have you here, Steve, whoever you are.
Steve, which may not even be your first name.
Can I just say in conversation, every time we talk, you don't go, hey, Steve. Hey, you just right when we have a conversation, you just go, Steve. So you don't need to keep saying whoever you are.
I think it's quite possible. In fact, I'm sort of hoping that we may well be the only podcast on, let's say, Apple Podcasts with an anonymous host. I mean, that's something. No. Morgan's saying no. There's other anonymous hosts?
Oh, yeah. There's everything.
Yeah. Oh, man. I thought we had an angle.
Can we return this equipment?
Is it too late? I think actually I have 30 days. Oh. Okay. So anyway, the first episode of Spiritually Challenged, the topic was specifically selected for a reason, which I will explain in a moment, or we'll find out in the course of the conversation. But the first topic is spirit guides. So do either of you have a sense of what a spirit guide would be?
No.
Is that the voice in the car that says, use the right 2 lanes? So what's a spirit guide?
Yeah, tell us what a spirit guide is.
Do you have any sense of there being entities in your life or energies or anything that help guide you through your life?
Yes.
Okay, to explain, what's that like?
So there are people in my life, and when I think about what is good in a friend or in a mate or in somebody you spend time with, it is about being with people who bring sort of the self that I want to be out the most. And to me, that is an energy. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's a connection with somebody that sort of brings out what I most want to be all the time.
Do David and I do that for you?
So I want to wait till season 4 to make a full judgment on that.
Okay.
But so far I don't feel
not really
bad. No, I think it's fine.
Good about yourself.
No, actually, joking aside, I feel good.
Okay. Do you want to? David is playing dumb a little bit.
I'm playing dumb in that you've talked about spirit guides. I don't think that I've ever
experienced
felt
any sense of,
or experienced that. Or I mean, maybe I get a sense of intuition here or there, but I don't know that I've ever felt like, oh, there's my guide sort of telling me what to do, where to go.
But you have people in your life, I'm sure, over the course of your life whose opinions you have relied on, that you've asked about, and couldn't those people have played a role in some way? And by the way, I'm supposed to be the one who's angry about spirituality, so I hope that I'm not.
You've turned the table.
But I can be out of character.
Oh, you can do whatever you want.
But those aren't spirits; those are people.
Well,
right?
But does the spirit guide have to be? But how do you know that it's not the spirit of the person or some spirit through which the person is talking to you?
I intended, when I brought up this topic, that we were talking about non-physical spirit guides, and you are talking about physical spirit guides.
No. But I could be the person who's telling me how to be, or who's bringing out the best part of me, could be, without my knowledge, channeling some spirit, and it's through them.
This is not what I expected from you. Absolutely.
Possible?
In fact,
and I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
In fact, I was actually going to say, in the world of spirituality, the understanding, as far as I have been able to take in from my experiences and my reading and everything like that, is we all have many entities, non-physical, who are there to guide us in life and help us find our way through. And we come into our lives with a specific plan. It's not like all the details are worked out, but we come into each of our lives with the idea of, okay, these are the big areas I want to work on. And then basically we have these guides who then help us to get into situations where we have the opportunity to work on those topics and evolve, because we're here to evolve. So exactly what Steve is saying is very true, which is one of the ways that guides can help guide us is through other people. Like they may give another person a nudge to, oh, here, why don't you suggest this? It will come, let me back up. The way guides very often, as I understand it, communicate with us is just through intuition. They give us ideas and just little nudges and little feelings that sort of like, oh, that feels good, I'll go in that direction.
So right there, there's the skeptic in me goes, well, why? Why do they just give you little nudges and feelings? If they want to help so much, why don't they just come out and say it?
Free will is critical. Each of us has free will. And one of the rules of being a guide is you're not really allowed to interfere with an individual's free will.
So you're like the angel in Christmas Carol? Was it? No, not Christmas Carol.
Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah,
right?
I don't remember. Did he not allowed to interfere?
I think
with free
he wasn't
will?
allowed to interfere. He could just sort of come in and show like little things here and there to sort of point him in the right direction.
Well, yeah, the idea is that guides, unless I guess there's some sort of critical situation where there's some call for some greater intervention, because you do hear stories about, someone's about to crash or life-saving measures, and you hear all kinds of stories. But in the day-to-day of it all, most of the communication is just done through little nudges and little...
Right. But the thing I don't understand or I don't necessarily agree with is this idea that I thought you said that people come into the world. So from the moment of their birth, is that what you were suggesting? That they have a plan for themselves, or there's a plan in mind for their life, and that from the moment that they are born, every subsequent moment of their life, there is somebody who's going to help nudge them?
No, well, from the moment they're born, there are people, there are guides that are with that particular soul and for this incarnation. But it's not like every moment.
But even the idea that somebody has a being has a plan from the first moment of their birth. Is that part of this?
Yeah, well, guides have to have a purpose. And so their purpose is to help us achieve our goals in our lifetime.
But so did I have goals?
I'm afraid you did.
I did.
Yes.
And what were those, and when will I accomplish them?
I have no idea. But so far I'd say you're doing very well.
But for you to know if I'm doing well, you would have to know.
I have no idea. I have no idea.
Can you find out for me? Is there someone you can ask?
That actually gets me to the reason why I wanted to bring up this particular topic.
Yeah.
So we all have these guides, right? And they mostly communicate with us through just feeling sensations, sort of like, oh, that feels good, I'll go this way. Or you might have a feeling of, oh, yeah, that feels right. Or David, when we're working together, I ask you all the time, what should we do? This, this. And I always sort of listen to you because you have this much clearer, in my opinion, channel in many ways than I do. And you sort of like, your instincts are always really good. That inspiration, that moment, in the old days, they would call it a muse. I mean, those are all just guides helping us out.
Right. So I believe in that idea. But to me, and you hear many people talk about somebody they met through serendipity who made a huge difference in their life.
Yeah.
Like that person could have been some sort of guide who changed the course of their life. We've all had people like that. It's harder for me to get around the idea that the day I was born, there was somebody keeping track who wrote down my goals and was like, all right, let's start working on these. And I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, but just the whole notion. I think the idea is we all have some idea of who we are when we're young. We're very much shaped by our environment. That happens through other human interaction, a lot of it that we're influenced by. Is that a guide? Yeah, you could call it a guide.
In spiritual understanding of things,
yes.
Well, two things. One is you talked about people coming into your life and making a significant change.
Yes.
A lot of times, as it's explained, before you come into this life, you actually make arrangements with other souls and you go, oh, I know I'll be in this lifetime and you can play this role and you'll help me get to this. And
when am I'm doing that when exactly?
You're doing that prior to your birth. Yeah.
And I'm inside.
He's saying you're in spirit form.
This is like, am I inside my mom when I'm doing this?
No.
You're before I'm ever born.
You're
inside your mom with all the people who you've decided to come into this world with.
Don't make slander about his mom.
So this is before my mom's, my mom already married to my dad?
Well, look, if you...
I'm sort of trying to get a feel.
I know, time is zero. In the spiritual world, there is no such thing as time. But if you're going to look at it in linear time, you died in your last lifetime. There is a period of time where you digest the experience of the last lifetime.
Yes.
And then at some point, you're like, okay, now I'm ready for more.
Yes.
And there's some sort of discussion with your guides.
And without sounding judgmental, even though this will, what evidence do you have that this is?
He saw defending your life.
That leads you to believe.
It was all laid out very clearly.
What makes you believe? I'm saying this in an authentic way.
It's a bigger question. But for what we're specifically talking about, there's some really great books where you have doctors, psychologists, very highly esteemed professionals who are putting people into trances. And these people are able to recall memories and they explain. And there's a lot of conformity between of the thousands of patients that they do this with. There's a lot of conformity and there's a lot of synchronicity.
What about your own life makes you feel this way? What experience or if you don't?
Okay, well, that gets me to the topic I'm trying to get to anyway.
Okay.
the reason I wanted to talk about spirit guides is because the most significant element in my spiritual journey really has been this encounter with what I would call a spiritual entity. But they were a spirit and they were guiding me. So they're a spirit guide.
So a spirit guide is a spirit that guides you? That's how you define it?
We all have personal spirit guides. My experience was, let me go back a ways, about, 25 years ago. I was already working with David and I was meditating and going to ashrams and doing all kinds of things. But at that time, I was sick. I was having a little bit of a cold. I wasn't very sick. I just had a little bit of a cold and I was just...
You had that cough that just wouldn't go away.
And by the way, David...
I'm a germaphobe and now I'm sitting in a room with a guy who's coughing nonstop for 6 months.
Yeah, so it was driving...
It really went on that long.
Driving. Yeah. It was a long-lasting... And I was reading this book about a mystic from the mid-20th century named Edgar Cayce. He was a very famous mystic. And the book was describing how Edgar Cayce would go into these trances. And in the state of this trance, he would just get all this information about someone would come to him who was sick, and then he would go into a trance, and then he could see what was actually the root cause of their sickness somehow through this state of trance. And not only that, he could then diagnose the cure to help the person. And I just remember in the book, the most remarkable story was the cure was very obscure and hard to come by. And while he was in the trance, he said, "Oh, you can find a bottle of this in a pharmacy in Newark, New Jersey on the third shelf at this." And he just knew exactly where it was. So he's a remarkable guy. And I was thinking, as I was sitting there coughing all over David, what I needed was someone like that in my life. I needed someone to fix my cough. I wanted Edgar Cayce. And shortly after that, a friend called me, someone who I knew from my spiritual world, and he said, "I just had this experience talking to this woman who channels this spirit, and it was really amazing, and you should check it out." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I was sort of thinking maybe this will be my Edgar Cayce. And so I set up a session with a woman who at that time was living in Ventura, California. Her name was Kathy. And I was speaking to her on the phone and I greeted her and she was lovely. And at some point, very early on, she said, "Okay, now let me go in." And I was like, "Okay." And she took some deep breaths and she coughed a few times and
ironically.
And then she started talking kind of in a slightly different cadence, actually. And she said, "Greetings." And she was now channeling this spiritual entity who called themselves Guidance.
So they identified as a they.
They were, well, no, I don't think it was so much a gender thing as it was a plural thing. Yeah.
So she was saying what Guidance was saying to her, or she actually was Guidance in that moment?
She was a channel for Guidance. And as I would learn later, sometimes she could remember what was said. Sometimes she couldn't. She just kind of went into a different...
She kind of became Guidance.
A channel for...
She was speaking to you as Guidance.
Yeah, Guidance was
exactly how it happened.
Speaking
through her to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you were saying, does
he speak English?
Yeah. And Guidance, no, probably... I don't think there's language at the level where Guidance operates, but in order to communicate with me, they were using the apparatus of Kathy that was preloaded with English to communicate with me.
And Kathy was somehow processing what Guidance was sharing with her and translating it or sharing it in a language that you could understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think
the questions are
I sort of think of it. They basically borrowed Kathy's mechanism, her instrument to communicate with me. And it just was a really powerful experience for me. There was this thing, Guidance seemed so wise and so compassionate and so helpful in the course of the first conversation. They kind of just gave me some general overview things about myself, which I found fascinating and some surprising. And then they also, I asked about my health and they said, "Well, yes, you have a dryness in your lungs and you need to take black currant seed oil and that'll really help." And
did they also send you to a drugstore in Newark?
No, they didn't.
No, because you were in Los Angeles at the time.
No, this is New York City,
super
actually.
Inconvenient. Oh, well, New York City you could have gone.
Easy
were you in New York? Were we in New York at the time?
We were in New York.
Oh, wow.
And so I ran out and got blackcurrant seed oil. And what's interesting, I think, about the story is I took the blackcurrant seed oil and it didn't really help. The cough continued. It ended up continuing for 4 or 5 more months. Maybe it did help. It just took 5 months for it to play out. But the energy of the session just felt so good. Oh, I should preface this whole thing. I'm really doing a terrible job of getting the information out, but this is
as good as it gets.
But I should preface this whole thing by saying, David can attest to this. I have suffered my whole life with depression, and
and anxiety,
and plenty of anxiety. David didn't want me to forget the anxiety. Yeah. I've really had a lot of depression. I mean, to the point of, David, you can pretty much recall most mornings when we start working in the morning. Back then, the first things I would say
it's like visiting the Grim Reaper first thing in the morning.
I mean, my first comment is, I don't really want to be alive.
Yeah, you were like, I don't want to go on. I can't do this anymore.
And then the day would get going and it would get a little bit better.
And always, by the way, the best way to start writing comedy
is start with inviting death. So the point being, I had a lot of depression. I had a lot of pain, emotional pain in my life. And there was something incredibly comforting about talking with guidance. It just felt like these people know what they're talking about. And so I think a couple of months passed and I said, I should do another session. And so I did another session, and it just felt really good. And they were so insightful and had access to all sorts of information that I had, no ideas about. And so I just started doing sessions more regularly. And soon it became, once every 2 weeks for years. And then at some point I was like, let's just do it once a week. And at some point I was doing twice a week. And it was just really, one of the ways I describe it, it was just like therapy on steroids, because you were talking about how you feel.
Did it shrink your testicles or give you rage?
No, I didn't measure.
Different kind of steroids?
Yeah, I didn't measure my testicles. That would have been an interesting experiment. But I just got lighter and better and happier. And it wasn't exactly a straight line. And there are all kinds of stories that we can tell. But it just was an incredibly fulfilling experience for me. And the truth is, life was so difficult for me. I don't know how far I would have gotten along in life if I hadn't had that support. It was incredibly valuable for me. So if we all have the sort of troop of guides that kind of work with us, I don't know that guidance is part of that troop, but guidance was a spiritual entity that helped me immensely, a non-physical spiritual entity. Their name is guidance. So I think they qualify as a spiritual guide for the sake of this conversation. And because so much of my information comes from these hundreds of sessions I had with guidance, I kind of wanted to put that out on the table first, just because I'll constantly be saying,
refer back to guidance.
Yeah, or at least I'll be giving you information, and that's where I got it.
It's also slightly different in terms of, if you're talking about spirit guides who are there for each particular individual, guidance was a little bit more spirit guides for hire, right? They could go help anybody, as opposed to, it's not like they weren't just Jay's helpers.
Well, guidance would say constantly, look, we are only here because you called us and asked for us.
But you called Kathy.
But I called Kat.
Guidance referred to themselves as we. That was always. Yeah.
I should tell Steve, just so he's not blindsided, that I actually spoke with guidance a few times too.
Through Kathy as well.
Through Kathy, yeah. Well, I don't know how else to get to them, because Jay, I would hit something in my life and Jay'd be like, well, just call guidance, and I would. So
I don't typically have a Texas accent.
In that voice.
I don't know why I did that.
I liked it.
But
you'll do that voice again?
Once a podcast, I will do it. So I've spoken to guidance too, and they would refer to themselves almost exclusively as we. And my favorite thing was they would call Kathy this Kathy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They would say, like, this Kathy is da 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 da.
And guidance was speaking to you about yourself, not about Jay.
About Jay. Yeah. No, I didn't have that much interest in Jay. Right. So I would call and I would get the same treatment, but I think I didn't. Whereas Jay hears them and buys in immediately, like, of course this is real. I start poking around looking for, is Kathy pulling one over on me? Is this fraudulent in some way?
David lives in a world of like, are people trying to steal money from him?
Everybody's a crook and everybody's a schemer and stuff like that. So I think I had a lot more trouble buying in, even when they were saying stuff that was maybe, pretty on the mark.
But so what was actually happening? And my question is, could Kathy have just been a very, and not, I don't say this by way of pulling one over on you. She was using a particular form, I'm making all this up.
Yeah.
A particular form of connecting with you, of therapy, for lack of, who knows, could have been medical science, whatever it might be, that wasn't necessarily actually rooted in her speaking to a spirit, but that something she did that connected with you that made you feel better.
Well, the thing about guidance was like when you started a session with guidance, they would explain, not right away, I got to know this over time with them. They would explain, the first thing they do is they just read your energy and they can see, and I'm no expert on this, they just explained it a couple times to me, but they can see based on the energy that's flowing around you, they can see where you are in the development of various aspects of yourself.
Why couldn't that have been Kathy reading your energy?
Well, not
just herself, because she's very well trained and connects with people.
What I'm saying is, in reading your energy,
yes,
they also were reading not just where you are in this moment, they could see where you are in your progression as a soul through your entire spiritual journey, your past lives. That, for example, one of the main things that guidance was so adamant about they weren't never adamant, but what they were so consistent about in constantly redirecting me was to look back into my childhood. I had sort of like written off my childhood as, it was fine and everything like that. They could see from the level of where they resided, whatever dimension they were in, they could see everything about my life and my past lives. And they could see how in this lifetime, they could see how traumatic my childhood had been. They could see in my childhood, my father was a very extreme screamer. He yelled quite a bit, and it took its toll on all of us in the family. But like guidance could see that and would keep bringing me back to it. And, it's different than going to a therapist who would be like, so tell me about your childhood.
But did guidance know this about your father and your childhood without anyone ever telling him?
Yes.
Him or her, sorry.
Yeah.
So guidance knew things about your past that guidance that Kathy could not have known. And there's no other obvious way that
I mean, which from in a spiritual world, that's not that remarkable. I mean, all the information is out there. There are all these dimensions, levels.
The information about you suffering a traumatic childhood because your father screamed a lot, that's not something that necessarily somebody would just know the first time they popped on the phone with you.
Not a human being, no. But I mean,
so if I was talking to somebody that was channeling a spirit and was telling me specific details about my childhood that the person I was speaking to on the phone could not have known, that would have some meaning to me. And was that what was happening?
That's how David kept on having his sessions with guys. He kept on looking for, like, give me some sort of proof. Go ahead, show me some sort of trick that'll make you think.
Strike some lightning, do something and let me know for sure.
The truth is, there isn't really any amount of that will ever be enough.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever communicated with guidance through anybody but Kathy?
Mostly no. I should add to the story that Kathy died about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was a terrible blow to me because I was very connected to them. When it was clear that Kathy was going to die, I said to guidance, can I connect with you in some other way if we're going to lose Kathy? And they said, no, it really wouldn't be necessary. That, it would be better for me to now kind of venture forward and find my own way, that I'd gotten to a place where I was better off sort of figuring it out on my own, coming out from sort of under the umbrella of guidance. So they didn't necessarily suggest that. In fact, they suggested that I don't. That being said, there was a time 8 months after Kathy died where someone told me about this woman who was a clairvoyant, and I set up a session with her and I told her about guidance, and she was like, well, do you want to connect with guidance? And I was like, okay, And in the session, she connected with guidance, but it was very different. She said, they're staying very distant from me. They're staying off on the outside. This is one of my favorite stories. She said, they're standing there, what they're showing me, because she was a clairvoyant, so she saw things. It's like they're standing in a baseball field. When I was growing up, baseball was very big in my life. It was one of the things that helped me through my depression more than anything else. They're standing in a baseball field. It's like they have a mitt and a ball, and they're just sort of throwing the ball into the mitt. And the message that they're sending to me is just play. You're in the world. Just play. Just relax. Have fun. Play. It's something guidance would talk about a lot in the course of our sessions. Life can be just like play. Allow yourself that freedom to play. And it really kind of touched me very deeply. It wasn't anything like my sessions with guidance, but that they were still there, and then I connected to them in that way. And then I finished that session. I got off the phone. I walked outside into my yard, and sitting on the grass for no reason that I could come up with was a baseball. And I picked it up. It's like there was just a baseball lying there. And I felt like guidance had put it there to sort of cement that experience. I used to play catch with my son, Oliver, in the backyard, but probably hadn't played in 10 years. Was there a ball in the bush that somehow got kicked? Probably, I guess. I don't know. But that's 10 years. And here it was out in the middle of the grass.
It's always those little signs. Whenever you talk to people about, spirit guides and spirituality, there's always these like little signs that you could sort of take or not take. And that always bugs me, it always like, why, instead of a baseball, I want it to be a unicorn. Or a cyclone, just like. But
what guidance would say, there's no amount.
I think there is, though. I think if a voice right now just said, David, stop doubting me.
Then you would go, oh my God, and tomorrow you'd go, did I really hear a voice? Did I not hear a voice? You would start to question it.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe
I don't think it would ever.
It drives
be
me
enough.
crazy that you have to take things on faith.
That's why I kind of keep asking the question about. So when you spoke to guidance the second time after Kathy had passed,
right?
If I understand correctly, you described it as a completely different experience from how you had talked to guidance before.
Yeah.
But you felt like it was guidance, and it was the same guidance.
Yes, but what I got from it was this was not a avenue I would pursue.
But was it the same they?
I got a feeling
who you connected with through Kathy.
Well, yes, from my point of view, yes.
And why?
It's just a feeling. It was just a feeling that you get. But before Kathy died, I said to guidance, "Are you really going to leave? I won't be able to access you." And what they said to me was, "No, we will always be there. We're not going anywhere." And I was like, "Well, I want to be able to talk to you, because what's the point of you being there?" And they said, "You'll learn to communicate with us in different ways." I can't remember the specifics. I think like you'll see a flower, and from looking at that flower, you'll get a feeling, a message, an insight that the communication would become more subtle. But I said, I like to be able to talk, and I like language. And they're like, this will be just as powerful, just as clear, but it's going to be different. And I have to say that at some point, I meditate every morning. And at some point, after Kathy had died and I was meditating, I began to hear in my head, I guess you could say someone talking to me, just a little bit. And I would kind of have a conversation, but I found like that wasn't what it was about either. It felt to me that was guidance talking to me, and that I had that channel to communicate in that way if I wanted to. But I actually have a very vibrant, I would say, relationship with guidance right now in my life. But it really happens much more on a feeling basis.
It does not happen through another person.
No. I just sort of feel their presence.
But is it's something that you sort of noticed when
it's something that happened over time after Kathy left. They would say, guidance would say, listen, even when Kathy was alive, they would say, if you ever want us more in your life, focus on your solar plexus, rotate your solar plexus in a way to just open it up, and then we can connect with you more directly. So guidance was always connected to me on a subtle level, even though I was talking to Kathy. I just was more focused on my conversations with Kathy because they were, in my perceptions, much more immediate and much more tangible. But now that Kathy's not here, I've learned to connect with guidance on a more subtle basis. And here's a funny thing. When I had that session with the woman, the clairvoyant, who also guidance was there and they're saying play. And in that session, I was talking to her about, I miss guidance. I wish guidance were here, and she said to me, they're telling me they don't like it when you talk about them in the past tense, which I thought was kind of funny, but neither of you are seeming to laugh very much.
No. I guess
a little bit the way I reacted to some of the hurtful things
that Jay said to you earlier.
Yeah. Well, both of you a little bit.
Did that address any of your questions, Steve?
So here I am left feeling a little bit similarly from how I started, which is that if this had meaning in your life and it changed your life and it helped you to get to a place that you don't think you've ever would have gotten to without it, then that is all true, right? That's true.
Right.
But did it seem at all surprising to you that guidance said that guidance's time with you was sort of done just the time that Kathy was no longer going to be there? Like all those things. Did all that really happen? It almost doesn't matter. The outcome for you is the outcome that you hoped for. And so in the end, that is your truth. But I still do, you sort of see, the fact that you're doing it with somebody over the phone, the spirit is everywhere. You happen to be doing it in a language you speak, over a phone because this person who can talk to guidance live somewhere that you can call them and talk to them whenever you need to. So there are a lot of non-spiritual elements that must be in place for you to be able to connect with the spirit. And how do you, for you, it seems like it's not an issue.
No, not at all, because I actually disagree with the premise, which is that there are non-spiritual elements that we're using. I mean, I think the understanding that we all sort of evolve into is that there is no such thing as non-spiritual. Everything is spiritual. Everything is basically made of energy, the one energy that created the whole universe. And just that those specifics happen to be the specifics that were appropriate for this experience in my life. It seems very natural to me. Why would we choose any other language if English were what I was speaking?
For a skeptic, all of these questions, I mean, that's just that's grist for the mill.
Why did guidance decide that things had sort of wrapped up in that phase?
Right, that's convenient. That's super convenient that Kathy was dying, and that I think they were using Kathy's death as okay, let's wrap this up.
But you're looking at things from a very human point of view, which would make sense because you are human. Ostensibly both human.
Right. When you say ostensibly.
But from a broader, more spiritual point of view, there is a synchronicity to everything. We all are operating in this sort of ebb and flow of energy. And it just is so natural that when one thing ends for this person, it would be appropriate for it to be the right time. That's just sort of like baked into the broader spiritual understandings of things. It's not like, isn't that coincidence? It's actually, everything is synchronistic.
You spoke through Kathy.
Oh yeah. I mean, I probably did it 25 times over 20 years.
And did it help you navigate issues that you were hoping to navigate?
It was never exact enough for me the way I needed or wanted it to be. For example,
go ahead.
I wanted like a yes/no answer on something. You know what I mean? And they didn't deal in yes/no answers. They dealt in energy and potentialities and things like that. So it never scratched the itch fully that I wanted it to scratch by predicting the future or telling me exactly what I wanted to know or something like that.
Did you believe there was a spirit or exactly what was happening?
I was always torn.
But versus, did it help you? Whatever it was,
definitely helped in that, talking with Kathy or with guidance was always insightful. It always at the very least was a good therapy session. And they definitely referred to my childhood. Did they get there on their own or did they lead me there? I was always kind of back and forth on that. So, I was always mixed. I always really wanted to believe it. Like I really wanted to, but then my natural apparatus is to be as skeptical as I could possibly be with regard to everything.
Right. But even as a skeptic, you acknowledge that it made a positive difference in your
Definitely
life.
made a positive difference in my life. And there were moments that were, interesting and fascinating and insightful. And there were moments I couldn't fully explain. I remember when my wife was pregnant with our first child and we were pretty close to giving birth. I got on the phone with Guidance and I got on the phone with Kathy and then, she said, okay, hold on. I'm going to go in and Guidance came on and went, oh my, oh, wow. You've got a firecracker. And they sort of like went into about our unborn baby who they just described in a certain way that was very specific. And when our daughter was born, very quickly, we sort of were like, oh, well, that's exactly what she is, And when my second child was born, they said very different things and they were pretty accurate. They were very different children. And someone could say like, oh, what about birth order or, things like that. But I don't know. And I wanted to believe it. And then the skeptic in me didn't always.
But in that case, you're describing something very specific.
Very specific.
That nobody wasn't
could know.
Wasn't possible to know,
It wasn't possible to know.
And so did that convince you?
It certainly helped. I feel like I'm on a seesaw and I sit in the middle of the seesaw and depending on what I'm getting in the moment, I either slide one way or I slide the other way.
You're not coming into it with a big issue.
There were plenty of issues, but
not in the way Jay had an issue that he'd been trying to solve in other means that hadn't succeeded. It wasn't that kind of thing.
No. Well, she did say that I was Vlad the Impaler's right-hand man.
So here, let me put some context. Guidance had access to all kinds of information, including past lives.
And had you remember doing that?
I do not remember being Vlad the Impaler's right-hand man, but apparently I did not like it, but I was very, very scared of him.
At one point when David was struggling with something, I think the issue was David feeling like really concerned about everyone and like taking more ownership in the suffering of individuals than was necessarily healthy for him at the time. In an effort to help him, Guidance pointed out that in one of his past lives, he actually was charged with helping, much to your dismay, I think, in that lifetime.
The way that Kathy explained it, I was like the Vlad would say, like, go kill that family. And I had to go kill that family. Otherwise, he was going to kill me. And I was horrified by doing it. In that world of like people telling you about your past lives and everyone thinks they're going to be like Napoleon or the Queen of England, I was like
the hatchet man,
the hatchet man for Vlad the Impaler.
But did you ask if you could have been like, hey, was I the Queen of England at some other point?
I didn't ask
you didn't
that.
Go into that.
I didn't ask that.
Vlad the Impaler's right-hand man was the only specific past life.
There were other past life things.
But even as a skeptic, you acknowledged.
I have to say that I also began from a place of absolute not believing.
When you first were introduced to Kathy?
First 26 years of my life, I was a complete atheist. I thought all religion.
And how did you first start going to an ashram or any of those life experiences that changed you?
I ended up having a very powerful spiritual awakening, which we'll talk about in another episode perhaps. But it was just suddenly like someone turned on a light switch and it was like, oh, I'm missing the whole point here. I need to get on the ball and figure this out because there's a whole lot more going on in this cosmos of ours than this tiny little reality that I've been more or less indoctrinated to believe based on what my father told me and what my mother told me and what the TV told me. That's just a very specific story that our culture has crafted and we've all been raised in it. And the truth is there is so much more happening in the world and it's fascinating. This is why I want to do the podcast. It's amazing and fascinating what's happening, who we are even. It's not even just what's happening around us, but the truth of who we are and the peeling back of that mystery, the uncovering of these broader truths is just so much more tantalizing and engaging for me than anything else at this point in my life. That's why I'm here. I want to talk about it. I want to explore it. I want to have fun with it, and I want to go deeper and deeper into it.
Right.
But there's so many things that we'll get to in in the course of things. And what we'll also be doing, which will be really fun, we'll also have guests, people who do channel, for example.
Could we get Vlad?
We can have someone channel Vlad, probably.
I want to ask him.
It's not that hard.
Yeah,
wouldn't that be an interesting episode? We got to get Vlad on the show.
Yeah.
I think that should be a priority. Morgan, can you see what we
see
can
if
do
Vlad
about
the Impaler is available?
If you're Vlad's right-hand man, you should get Vlad. Oh, you were. No longer.
Yeah.
Did things end
when was Vlad the Impaler? What was it, like the 1200s?
Do you know if things ended well between you?
Between Vlad and I?
You don't know.
I can't imagine they ended well.
Yeah, okay. So then maybe
I bet you got impaled.
There's a good chance that I was impaled.
So it would not be a natural, easy thing for you to go back to Vlad now and go, hey, you might
could I get a reference
from the 12 podcast we got? Can you stop by the air conditioning? We'll fix it. It'll be fine.
No. But I think that's a great idea. We should find someone who can channel Vlad the Impaler, and he's probably feels bad about what he did at this point, and he's probably very
hopefully, but you don't know. I mean, it'd be good to know. We don't know.
Yeah. Anyhow, this was really super fun, and we'll do more episodes, and we'll get into greater detail about many of the topics that we just lightly touched upon today. And thank you very much for being here. And I want to thank also all our spirit guides who came.
Told us what to say.
And
yes, it's really great. Thank you for sharing so openly your own life and
Thank you for sharing so openly, Steve. Oh, wait.
Whoever you are.
All right. That was the first episode.
How did you get in my house?
That was the first episode. Were you here to do the air conditioning? Our air conditioner is broken, but next episode, hopefully we'll have air conditioning. That was the first episode of Spiritually Challenged. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll have future ones. Thank you.